What up, what up, what up? Mic check, mic check.
What up?
We got live on the Mic Check podcast. Make sure we got everything rocking. Welcome, welcome.
My bad. You hear me?
Make sure we got everybody tuned in.
Can you hear me? All right. T, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I hear you loud and clear. What's going on, Q?
What up, man? Just at the gym at the moment, trying to get this workout in real quick. What's
Uh,
going on, man?
Not a whole lot so far. Just wanted to tap in with the people. It
No
looks
doubt.
like we get a few viewers around this time, so I figured we get this live schedule going so we can start to build this following here.
Yeah. Did you check out the boxing voice this morning? Were you able to hear any of that this morning?
I have not seen the boxing voice. I haven't really seen anybody's stuff yet
I
that
got
was
you.
done this morning. Yeah, I've been training all morning. However, I do plan on checking into some stuff um, and see what's good.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation they was having, just revolving
Okay.
around Showtime's pay-per-view platform functionality and whether or not it's in need of a serious overhaul, because a lot of people are kind of feeling, I guess not a lot, I should say that both the hosts were kind of talking about the some of the inconsistencies and some of the kind of inconveniences, I really should say, that come with Showtime's pay-per-view platform, because you can't pause, you can't rewind, you can't watch it afterwards again, even though you bought it. So it was an
Yeah.
interesting conversation because I hadn't really thought of that. All I've been focused on really was the quality of the card and the price point, but the functionality of it is important too, for sure.
So what I think, and you talking about the boxing voice, right?
Yeah, they started this morning,
So
like literally right before I went for my run this morning.
so which one of the hosts? I asked this question because sometimes if you watch the show enough, you'll get what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
Sometimes it could be a little over the top. I think specifically sometimes Ness gets on the point and he doesn't consider all aspects of his point.
Mhm.
But that being said, I'm not here to bash another show, but I wanted to bring
Right.
that up just to say that I've purchased plenty of Showtime pay-per-views and I'm able to go back and watch them for a couple months after once you buy it. If you buy it through the app or if you buy it through your cable provider, there's a certain location within their platform that you have to go. Like it's not readily available, but it is available. And then of course they're gonna give the fight away for free in about 2 weeks.
Right.
Whenever they have their next card, you can be able to watch it for free on Showtime as long as you have a subscription. And they typically give away a free subscription leading up to big cards. That being said, um, I get it because I saw a video recently from a YouTuber who was talking about being in, I think he's in Taiwan, and
Mhm.
basically he was saying that he can't buy the pay-per-view at all, so he was going to illegally stream it because of that.
Right.
So I
Right.
understand that too. Like you want to be able to like you want to be able to get access to the things that you care about. And
Right.
he was saying that he was expressing that he was upset that he couldn't get it at all. To me, that's
Yeah.
more important that you don't have any access. Being able to access a pay-per-view and then potentially not being able to rewatch it or stop and start, that's new age convenience. There was a time where either you saw it or you didn't. If you think back to the Mike Tyson days and the early Holyfield days and stuff like that, when you bought those pay-per-views, either you were in the room when the action happened or you just had to hear about it. Don't get up, go to the bathroom, nothing like that. So that's a new age convenience, and I get it. We're in the technological age, but I never had that issue with
Mhm.
the streams. But I
Yeah.
also use it through the app. I don't use it through my cable provider. So maybe
Okay.
that's the difference.
Well, I know. I haven't had cable in 4 years, so any type of sports that I watch, it's always through a streaming app,
Mm-hmm.
on demand, whatever it is, pay-per-view, whatever it is. Now, I didn't buy this pay-per-view because we've talked about it. It's not necessarily something I thought was great value for money when you talk about the matchups.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they could have done a little better matchmaking for a card at that price point, but for the convenience that comes with certain other cards, like I know, for example, I can recall when we bought me and my cousin split the Charlo doubleheader 2 years ago. Um, we were having some streaming issues through the internet, and everybody knows that happens from time to time. But at the time, it was because there was actually a rainstorm in our area, and that convenience of being able to go back and rewind it once we got our connection reset back up would have been valuable, because I know that Top Rank definitely has that feature on their ESPN Plus app. When you buy pay-per-view, you can pause it, rewind it, or whatever else. And ultimately, you know this more than anybody, it's about competing with people around you that are providing the same services. And if they're not able to let you pause and rewind, but other apps can when they do their pay-per-views, that's something, that's a small thing that they can offer that would make it more value for money, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can agree that there is value in providing a way for people to just enjoy the content better. Specifically, maybe I missed a moment. Maybe the announcer said something important about the card that might be critical to my viewing experience, my viewing pleasure, and I just missed it. So I could see that, there's benefits there. I mean, it's a legitimate claim. If he's unable to get access to replays and stuff like that, obviously that's something it would make me apprehensive about using that platform. Whereas, like you said, with ESPN, you can kind of go back and do what you want to do with it. The zone, you could go back, and if you have the app on your phone, a lot of times it'll pick back up. Like if your app was to crash or something,
Yep.
it'll pick up where you were sometime instead of going straight to live, which most platforms don't do that. So that's a little bit more convenient. The zone has an advantage over ESPN Plus and Showtime because they started off as an app to begin with. So they've mastered being an app long before the others got involved. And I think that when you're a company that's evolving into an app-based service, you're going to go through the hiccups and figure out you need the customer feedback to tell you, hey, I want to spend the money with you, but I need you to do better in this particular regard. And Showtime could take notice of what he's saying. They have a big enough platform to get that information over to them. And that's something that Steven Espinoza and the crew need to look at. Now, if it's going to happen anytime soon, that's going to be contingent on what Showtime's going to do next. Huh?
I said I would doubt that they're going to do it immediately because, that takes time and that takes, reevaluation. But I guess my question would be, bro, if you're a guy who's competing, right, and you're looking at what's the best thing that I can offer, should it take your fans telling you what you should have, or should it take me looking at our competitors and seeing what they're doing well and then trying to implement some of that? Because you know this, when you're coaching a sports team, if I'm watching film on somebody and they run a good play, right, and I like that play, I'm like, ooh, that's a good play, that will work. You damned if you don't use it. You know what I'm saying? Imitation is the highest form of flattery. So that's my only thing is like they know that these other apps are offering these other features without the fans even having to tell them. At least I would hope they would know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of both between kind of looking at what your contemporaries are doing, but also what is your customer. So the difference between a coach kind of, grabbing some stuff from other people's playbook and a business looking at ways to expand, you have two different things that you have to satisfy. A coach really doesn't have to satisfy the fan. He needs to satisfy the owner and make sure he's winning. But a business has to satisfy the viewers because you're presenting a product and that matters more in this particular regard. And then they also have to satisfy their bottom line. As far as just me knowing how apps work and all that stuff, honestly, if they have enough outcry about getting those features added to the app, your programmers are going to spend less than a day to do it. More than likely, when you design an app that does play and stream, stop, rewind, replay, and all that stuff, it's already built in. You just have to turn it on and off.
Uh-huh.
So if they're being blind to, just not listening to their clientele, that's on them for not listening to their clientele, which is the people that are actually spending the money to watch, and they'll see the decline in sales or whatever. I think it's going to be more important when it's bigger cards that more people want to see, because more people are going to have that same problem. Like this was one of their bigger cards in the last year. I would say since the Spence fight, this is the biggest Showtime card.
Mhm.
So, as far as like popularity and whatnot. Now, the other bigger card, which didn't sell well, was the Fox stream, and that's a whole different platform. You
Yeah.
can't even buy that through Showtime. So a little bit different dynamic there. But all of that to say, I think it's a legitimate point that they made. I know it's not every user's experience, because I don't really remember not being able to stop the transmission. I think I had for 90 days or 120 days, I could still go back and watch Spence Ugas and stuff like that. So I'm not
Bro,
certain. But
I need whatever platform you got then, because my wife and I share Showtime now. She uses it for the storytelling, stuff, right? That's what she
mhm,
uses it for primarily. But
mhm.
I usually use it, for some of that as well. We watch The Shy, we watch, some certain shows.
Yeah, for sure.
But my main, use for Showtime is when they have fighting cards on. So every time I've ever bought a pay-per-view on there, whether it was, you know, um, the doubleheader with Charlo, whether it was, Spent Ugas, whether it was whatever card it is, as soon as it's off, it's nowhere to be found on my app. It's gone. So maybe there's a discrepancy on packaging that's not really clear to people, because I know that we don't have the Paramount Plus like you do. We don't have the bundle. So maybe that's something that comes with the bundle. But as far as just the Showtime app as it is, stand still, the one that we've had for over 3 years, I haven't been able to see it. Not on the back end anyway, after the fight is over.
I think part of it is I'm trying to remember where I saw it. Oh, it's under purchases. So you have to go. It's not in your regular place. Like the app that's on like the gaming systems, like the Xbox and the
Mm-hmm.
PlayStation, functions differently than the app that comes like built into the smart TVs. So
Yeah,
your
that's what we
navigation
have.
is a
Smart
little
TV
different.
app. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and part of that is because they have to create different versions for different service providers. Like LG TVs, they just got HBO Max like middle of 2022. So they have a whole different app that was created because it meets their security protocols, their installment protocols, like the app size, stuff like that. So when you start to get into the minutia of things, you're looking at different users that have a different user experience, mainly because they have to create different versions of these apps for these specific platforms. So like I said, I think that he has a legitimate point. I won't disrespect somebody else's perspective or point of view on something like that, because honestly, that's that's something that's important. That's something that needs to be noted. Let me see. We've been on for about 13 minutes. So I think we go ahead and get into the boxing. I know that's primarily why you took some time out of your day to jump on. So we can
For
talk
sure.
about the fight. Let me throw that up on the screen. Uh, and I mean, you're pretty aware of like the different results that from the weekend, right? You already know what happened. You just didn't really
Yeah,
watch.
I've seen clips and highlights on social media and stuff like that. They obviously Showtime posted the final
Yeah,
minute of the fight, with Tank. So
yeah. Okay,
definitely.
so I mean, we could talk about just the results. I mean, I watched the fights, and I'm going to do an analysis video later anyway. But I kind of want to just give reactions to like the results of the fight, really, and just talk
Hey
about the
T,
reaction on social media. Yeah, yes, sir.
one thing before we get into the results, bro. Just a quick thought.
hmm
What did you think about the fight starting after 1 a.m. Eastern time?
that was rough. I thought because it was midnight central, so it's like, bruh, what are y'all doing? I don't like that at all. I don't like main events starting after midnight.
I mean, bro, just put some perspective on it for the fans real quick. If I'm not mistaken, that fight started at 8 p.m. Central Time. So you're talking
hmm
about a 4-hour card that only shows 4 fights.
Yeah,
And what? How many of them went the distance? Boots,
all but one.
Rashidi Ellis. The first one, what was the first one? versus
Demetrius
Andrade.
Andrade. Boo boo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they all went the distance. So you talking about 42 minutes, around there, 45 minutes if you want to say give or take. I don't understand why these cards aren't starting any earlier. Like, if you're gonna have a fight with four fights on it, I would think you should be starting at around 6:30 at the latest.
So I think it was poor planning. I think it was poor planning. I mean, and that's part of the conversation. So we can actually start there. So it was poor planning because I believe they anticipated at least two knockouts, and the only one who delivered that was Tank. I think they even expected that Demetrius Andrade might get a knockout as well because the timing, it seemed like enough time. Because if you think about it, like you said, there's 36 minutes of boxing per fight, and then you have another 9 minutes in between rounds.
We
I'm
can
sorry,
minus
you have
off.
another 11
We can
minutes.
minus off 6 minutes off of Andrade's fight because his was a 10 rounder.
It was a 10. Okay. So, but you still got 9 minutes in between. So you're looking at 30. You're looking at 30 plus 9. So that's 40 minutes, and then the others are 40 plus. You probably should start the fight card a little earlier, maybe 7 Central. That would have put Tank in the ring at 11 or around 11. And the thing about it is they really didn't put much filler. You know how usually you get filler between all the fights. You really
Mm-hmm.
didn't. They didn't do
Well,
anything
no,
because
they didn't have enough time to do any of that because all the fights went to distance.
right. Right, exactly. And I mean, it was poor planning because I believe they expected some knockouts. I did hear some people saying, "Oh, it went over because the prelims that were televised on YouTube went over." And I'm like, that had nothing to do with it. They had a scheduled time for the pay-per-view broadcast of 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. It doesn't matter how early those early cards would have gotten done, and they were done really early because they had about 40 minutes with no fights. Because I think another fight got pulled. Anthony Peterson's fight was pulled off the card. So the early cards finished early. They finished ahead of schedule. I mean, so
And something else for everybody to realize too, I think that context is key in this situation, is that even though they had these fights, that were lined up on YouTube, a lot of those fights, if you've ever been to a fight card before, if they're going over to a TV slot, they're gonna skip one of those fights that doesn't finish. They're gonna do the TV fight, and they're gonna come back to that fight after the cable broadcast goes off. They're gonna go
yeah,
back to it at the end of the main event. So that's an option as well.
yeah. The early card is never going to push a major event, especially a pay-per-view event. It's never going to push it back. So you know, I never really had a concern with that. I mean, it was a day. Initially, it was scheduled for 10 fights. I get it. They try to give people as much money as they could. I mean, as much value as they could for whatever it cost to get in that building because the tickets were ridiculously high. And I get it.
That's interesting. I should have looked. I didn't look at those ticket prices. What was they looking like?
They had like nosebleeds were 200 plus to get in the door, and down next to the ring was like 7,000 for some of them seats. So that's a crazy amount of money to get into a fight, right? So if the
That's tough,
cheapest
especially
seat,
right after Christmas too. You got to think about that too.
yeah,
That's right after Christmas. People don't spend money. That's tough. $200 a pop. That's tough.
yeah, like $200 just to get in the door. You know what I mean? So I figured that's why they try to load the card, especially with local people, because obviously most locals are attending the fight. So if it's $200 to get in, but you're local and it's like the biggest event you've had in your city in years and years on top of years, then they they milked that community for as much as they could. And plus, like you had pointed out very accurately on the previous stream, they got a lot of fighters that were from the DMV Philly area. So that means that everybody was within a couple hours, maybe 4 hours max driving distance that had a low interest in those fights. So I mean, it was executed well in that regard. Um, the pay-per-view, I think you have a good argument for it wasn't worth your value. I found value in it. There's a lot of fighters I want to see. And I'm just like you. And my effort to support boxing has a lot to do with me investing my own money in it too. And the fights that I feel like I want to see. Some cards I'm not interested in paying for, and I don't. But others I am. So, but I think the value was there for people that went in attendance. I just think on the pay-per-view they could have done better as far as the timing and the scheduling. So um, I want to start off with let's talk about Demetrius Andrade versus Damon Nicholson. So that fight, Bogle dropped him twice, right? But he pretty much controlled the tempo and the pace of the fight. He fought where he wanted to fight. He engaged when he wanted to, and I thought it was a good showing, just not a great showing. But he had an opponent who was dead set on being the spoiler. So he was doing everything he could. He hit Andrade with some great shots. He was game the entire night. He didn't run away even when he was hurt, even after he got put down a couple times. He definitely was very game, and I thought it was a good, entertaining fight. It was ugly. It was what they've always said about Boo Boo's fighting style. It's not a super pleasure to watch, but you could see that he's a technician in the ring. He does what he does really well. It was a good introduction of 168. He fought a fighter who was bigger in stature, in my opinion, just naturally a bigger, more muscle mass. So I thought it was a good test on what he's going to look like when he's in there with true 168. My issue is going to be, is he going to have the power to really do damage to the dudes that have been in there banging already? That remains to be seen, but I thought it was a good fight overall. Now, have you had an opportunity to kind of look around and see the Rashidi Ellis result?
Yeah, so I did see all the results. You know, I looked it up on BoxRec the day after,
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing other people's reaction. And if I'm just talking specifically about Andre just for a second, I mean, it sounds like more of the same with Andre. Um, he's a fast starter. You know, he gets off to a good start early, first 4 or 5 rounds. He's dominating the fight. He's dictating the pace. He gets a knockdown or two, and then he fades or he coasts down the stretch.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard that everybody said. And that's the same thing he's done in all of his other fights. I mean, I saw every one of his fights on DAZN. Anybody who's followed me knows that I'm a DAZN subscriber, so they know that I'm gonna watch the fights if I pay my money for it. The Walter Contadakla fight he had, the Maciej Sulecki fight he had, the Liam Williams fight. I mean, every fight other than his very last fight before transferring over to Showtime, they've all been, slow starts or not slow starts, fast starts, I should say, with him tailing off at the end. And I just don't know how much that's going to draw any of the big names to want to fight him outside of the fact that maybe they think that they can beat him because they've seen him do it now on their own platform and now he's on that side of the street. I think a Caleb Plant goes in as a favorite against him. I think a David Benavidez goes in as a favorite against him. And I think the only guy really that you would have a even 50-50 with, and it's really probably just because of inactivity, is a Charlo fight. Because we haven't seen Charlo fight in over a year and a half. It's going to be basically 2 years by the time I think he really is going to even get back in the ring because he was supposed to be fighting in February. Well, bro, it's January. There's still not even a fight announcement. There's not even a fight date. So
I don't know what the future will hold for Demetrius on PBC as far as like being able to attract the opponents based on what a fight with him looks like.
mm-hmm.
Just because he's kind of it's like you said, he doesn't have the most entertaining style. I didn't necessarily see him sticking to code as far as like his usual because I felt like he fought well all 10 rounds. I thought he did what he was supposed to do. He got a couple of times and he took some good shots from Nicholson, but he was never really in danger, in my opinion, of getting like KO'd or of getting stopped. I thought when Nicholson applied pressure, he handled it well. It looks like it caught him off guard the first time, but once he was able to time up what Nicholson was trying to do and figure out his strategy, I thought he did really well and handled it. I thought it was a decent, just kind of just ugly fight overall, but I felt like part of it was just the way his opponent's approach was. His opponent's approach was to just use his size and just muscle him up. And once Andrade figured that out, he had a strategy for it, and that's why he was able to catch him late. He was able to capitalize on his opponent's mistakes. But it is what it is. Now, Now Ellis, on the other hand, Ellis actually did exactly what you were talking about. Fast start, slow down at the end, and I don't know. Tell me if you've noticed this. Have you paid attention to most of the guys who actually work within the snack program? Um,
Uh, well, yeah, you're talking about Caleb Plant, you're talking about Devin Haney, you're talking about who else? Andre Ward back in the day. I'm trying to think who else.
yeah,
Who else has notoriously worked with Snack? Amir Khan.
yeah.
Um,
And right now,
trying to
Ellis.
think.
Um,
Yeah, is Ellis
I
doing
can't
stuff with
think of
Snack
a
right
whole
now?
bunch. Yeah, I mean, and he even came in with snack on his trunk, so he's
Okay.
been bigging them up. It's been he's I don't know exactly how long, but he's been there. I could go back and look and find evidence of him there for a little while. But the the issue with what I've seen from those guys is that maybe I mean all of them don't even have great conditions either. Not all of them, some of them do, but they're not really generating power. And part of it, I know power is partly technique. KOs partly come with technique, timing, the speed of your punches, stuff like that. But I'm not seeing that. And he had nothing for Roman Villa. Now he's in there with a guy who basically knocked out every opponent except one. And the one he didn't knock out, he's dropped every single opponent. And now with Rashidi Ellis, he's dropped every single opponent he's been in the ring with. He's just had nothing for him. And then later in the fight, where he was starting to fade as far as stamina, Ellis couldn't give him anything. I mean, he's landing
Yeah.
flush shots and it wasn't working. I'll tell you who Villa reminded me of. Have you watched Jose Benavidez like the last couple of fights, like the one against Danny Garcia and the one before that? Did you see either of those fights?
Yeah, I saw the Danny Garcia fight. Yeah, I watched that live. I
So
saw his
do
fight
you know
against
how
Bud. I saw his fight in that fight. Yeah.
at least against Bud, it felt like he was still trying to be the boxer they thought he would be. Um, his last few fights, like his last three, last two for sure. He just kind of stalks around in a high guard,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he's low punch volume. Villa was a lot like that, except he had more power than Jose does, from what I can tell. So he's just waiting to land that massive shot that kind of dizzies you, that'll buzz you, and then he'll just try to take you out. And that's really what happened in the Ellis fight. Villa just kind of stalking. He's like a zombie, just trudging around the ring, just following him around. And for some reason, Ellis just couldn't keep him off. I disagree with the scoring here. I had it. I had Ellis up at worst 7-1 after 8 rounds, but I had it a clean sweep. This guy wasn't
Mm-hmm.
touching. He was missing badly. He wasn't landing clean shots. And then around the ninth round, it looked like Ellis ran out of gas and his initial strategy was gone. And he figured out, well, I can't knock this dude out and I can't even hurt him. I just got to get on the run. And I think he just ran out of energy, ran out of stamina. And
Mm-hmm.
he started getting touched. Even if I scored it this way, even if you give Villa 9, 10, and 11, and then
Was it
Ellis
two
was knocked down.
knockdowns?
Well, the two knockdowns came in the 12th. I called three, though.
Okay.
I count three, but you can't go lower than 10-7. So, so I gave him 9, 10, and 11, and then I gave Villa a 10-7 12th round. I still put him at I put it at 114, 112. But even if you gave Villa one of the early rounds, let's say you gave him the first round or the second round because they were kind of close enough, I guess, you still got to draw. So I don't
Yeah.
understand how the judge got. They had, a majority. They had two judges had 114, 112 for Villa, and I just don't see that. What up, Chicken Talk? Thanks for checking in, bro. Tap in anytime if you feel like it. But yeah, it didn't make sense, man.
Well, here's what I'll say. Everybody knows that fights are, judged individually round by round. It's round by round scoring. Um, and everybody knows that going into a fight, but it says something for the fighter that finishes the fight stronger than the other fighter. Because if anybody remembers, and this was a legendary fight, but you're talking about Oscar De La Hoya against Felix Trinidad, right? Oscar gets off to a great start. He's probably sweeps the first 6 rounds, 6-0, 5-1 at worst. You know, he gets to the 8th or the ninth round. Now, there wasn't any knockdowns in that fight that I recall, but he gets on his bike the final 4 rounds, you know, and he gets touched a couple of times. He's not the aggressor he was in the first couple of rounds. And at the end of the fight, you know, you got judges that are, you know, swayed in one direction or the other. Now, obviously, that goes to the ineptitude of boxing judges not being able to fight or, you know, judge a fight round by round, because if you've already scored a round for one guy, that shouldn't affect the next round. But something is to be said about that, because that's not the first time we've seen a guy who starts slow but finishes stronger than the other guy, even though he didn't win enough of the later rounds. You know, he gets the nod in the end. So I don't know, man. I
Yeah.
think it's tough to say. And just going back to your snack analogy, when you were talking about guys that seem to all come from the snack training facility having a lack of you know, power, having a lack of maybe even stamina. I think the one thing that should be considered is that all of those guys are the same kind of fighter. That's the one thing I thought about, is like, you know, Caleb Plant is a pure boxer. Devin Haney, pure boxer. Rashidi Ellis, pure boxer. Andre Ward, pure boxer. You know, Amir Khan, pure boxer. Like, none of these guys are pressure guys. None of these guys are boxer punchers. They're all the same. They all come from the same line of boxing style. So I think in the end, you know, the boxer, the pure boxer, is the guy who, you know, stays at arm's length, uses his speed, his agility to get around the ring, and relies on judges to see the clear and clean work that he's doing. And when you're that kind of a fighter, you're always going to leave it up to someone else to, you know, judge your fights. And, you know, fights are subjective. So unfortunately, that's what happens with some of these guys. I think, is when you're a pure boxer, you're relying on judging to be fair, adequate, and accurate. You know, and sometimes it's not. We all know that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you do allow yourself to be put into you allow yourself to be put into a bad position when you leave it up to the judges and they thought that they're just gonna outbox you. My biggest thing is, in my opinion, they got this wrong. Even if, you know, like, if you know, I scored it, you know, round by round. Even if you give E 2 of the first 6 of the first 8, you still can't get to 114, 112 his way, even with a 10-7, 12 round. It just doesn't add up to me. And you know, that's just my concern as far as that goes. But ultimately, um, ultimately they both agree that they would like to fight again. I just don't know what Ellis can do to not get the same outcome. So just in general, in your opinion, when you have a result play out like it did, like Ellis was early and Villa comes on late with some knockdowns, do you think that there's anything that was said with judges? Just in your opinion, based on you know, your boxing knowledge.
I guess I'd probably say that there's a potential to add an extra round, make it an odd number of round, or take a round away, so you can get rid of the draw aspect. I
Hmm.
hate a draw in a boxing match. I've never been one that kind of was cool with that. Like, there's not really any other sports, unless you're in special scenarios where, you know, there's a pure draw or a tie.
Hmm.
So I think it would go a long way towards helping boxing get clear winners if you went to, you know, 11 rounds or 15 rounds, or 13 rounds.
What?
Because back in the day when they did 15 rounds, you almost never got a draw because it's an odd number of rounds. Somebody wins 8, somebody wins. Same thing at
We
13
losing
rounds.
just a little bit. Go ahead.
You know,
We're losing you a little bit. You must be on the move. While we get you back, I'll go ahead and just reply to that for those who are watching. I think that maybe you modify scoring versus the number of rounds. I do like an even number of rounds over adding a round or taking a round away. Um, but I do think that you could do something different with the scoring to where you can assign a score to a fighter instead of, hey, you won that round, I'm going to give you a 10. Maybe I have an option to give you an 8, 9, or 10 based on your performance in that round, and I give you a hard score kind of like judging in gymnastics or something like that. That
Yeah. Can you
provides a
hear me
little bit
now?
of parity in scoring. Okay, yeah, now you're back. Okay. Now go ahead and what were you
Okay, for
saying?
sure. No, I was just saying in general, I just think that, it might be something worth considering to add an extra round because, you can get to a spot where you got an odd number of rounds, you'll have less draws. Because the one thing that I hate is when you get guys who get into these fights, there's no knockdowns, there's clear cut winners of each round, and it's a draw. It's kind of like, well, you put the boxers back 6 months because now they got to do a rematch in most situations if it's a high stakes fight, especially when you're talking about
Mm,
mandatory slots, when you talk about title eliminators, you just backing up the line of mandatories that need to be, consolidated when you have these draws. And even if it's a situation where maybe you don't do that in all fights, but you do it in championship fights, that are
mhm.
considered, qualifying for a world title or world title ranking or something top
Yeah,
10
high
ranking, I
profile.
think that's something to consider, like doing 11 rounds or doing 13 rounds. I would really realistically, I think it's probably 13. 13 is the answer probably, because I don't think you can take
I,
rounds away now when you're
yeah,
spending more money on fights. So
yeah, I don't think at this point you go down to 11 at all. You already got some high level fights that are 10 rounds for some reason. But
mm-hmm.
what I would say, and you probably weren't able to hear because of the connection, but I was saying I probably wouldn't touch the rounds. I would start to differ with scoring. Here's two options you can consider. So you can either set it to where a judge is able to give you a specific number based on your performance in a round. Not saying you win a round so you automatically get 10, but the ability to throw an odd number in there where you see necessary. You could give an 8, a 9, or a 10, or 7, 8, 9, 10. Obviously you take a point away for knockdowns up to basically 2 points. So that might even put you down to where you can get some sixes. That being said, the other option would be open scorecards. So what about you have to post those scores at least to the broadcast, not to the corners because you want them to
Mm-hmm.
fight properly, but you put it to the broadcast and that's that. So
Mm-hmm.
you have some accountability, some oversight. It has to be shown. We know we don't have to do an unofficial. We get an official scorecard each round to where we can see how this is going. So whatever the announcers are saying, then we have an option to go against that. We
Yeah,
can say, okay, it doesn't matter what these announcers are saying. Obviously, they're slanted this way, but these judges are saying this is a more competitive fight than they also give credit for. So let's go with Ken Cox's comment. He has beating 10 rounds, nobody won the first round in the 10 fight. Agreed. There you go. Thanks, bro. I agree with that. I think there's a lot of fights I've seen a couple in 10 rounds in the fights because both guys were really competitive. They were doing their thing. They were giving
mm-hmm.
as much as they were getting. And I thought the 10-10 would have been good a few times, but it's like taboo. It's like they're afraid to give it to both fighters. I just don't see it enough. I
Yeah.
don't know. What do you think?
I think I can understand why they wouldn't want to do 10-10 rounds just because that means that the judging isn't really being done. Because if you give a 10-10 round, it's kind of like not forcing the judges to make a decision. And I think that, I would want to err more on somebody being more decisive than less decisive. Because I think if you start giving 10-10 rounds or giving more leeway with 10-10 rounds, you might end up having even more draws because you end up having fights that are close. And then, the judges are not wanting to make a clear cut decision. I mean, it's something to think about, but in my opinion, I mean, the 13 rounds is probably the best answer, in my opinion, if you keep the scoring, everything else the same way. Um, I don't really see I don't really see a need to change the scoring columns as far as like, what's a 10-9 round, what's a 10-8 round, what's a 10-7 round. Um, I really don't see it that way. The one thing I think could also be changed would be using replay to determine knockdowns. I think that that's probably an option that needs to be considered as well because a judge can only see so many things from so many angles, and if a guy falls down, it's a judgment call sometimes where was it a slip, was it a push, or was he knocked down by a punch? Especially if it's on the other side of the guy's body, you really can't see that kind of stuff. So I think that's something else that might be, helpful to help, these judges make more accurate decisions is if you have replay for knockdowns. But as far as what you were saying, bro, when you talk about, the broadcast getting a public score, I think that would be an awesome new aspect to add into fighting. The only problem I would have is you're saying, okay, well, the fighters are not going to know. But if one fighter is from one team, that's supported by the broadcaster, by the promoter, and then another fighter is not, you already know that there's going to be some inside jobs done there where they're going to be letting the guy who's the house fighter know, hey, they gave him this round, or they're going to be letting the judge know, or not the judge, the trainer, I should say, the head trainer know, whether it's earpiece, I don't know what you're talking about, you know what I mean? But there's going to be some inside jobs done where it's not going to be completely equal and fair because you're going to have house fighter versus away fighter, and I think that might cause some problems if you don't post it publicly in general.
I mean, I can see that. I mean, I think with all that we know about CTE and things like that, like pushing these fighters to fight longer fights, because you have to think about this as well. The longer you make fights, the more chances you are within that particular context to have something go wrong as far as, brain injury and stuff like that. So to me, I wouldn't make fights longer. I don't want to make them shorter, but I definitely wouldn't make them longer. Or if you're going to make them shorter, 10 needs to be it, and that's it. But just my understanding of how CTE works, and these numbers were picked with certain conditions in mind. The number of rounds were picked with certain conditions in mind, even down to the amateur level. So I would say the only place you could look if you're not going to make the fights a round longer is to score them differently, or just the way that you present scores. Now, something to consider is this: in a championship fight, then we can have overtime. So if, let's say, we're going into the left, right, if we go into the 11 and it's looking like there's an opportunity for this to turn into a draw, we could go ahead and notify both corners that there's potentially, listen, we might go 13. So, hey, you need to be ready to go into a 13th round. And that way it's a case-by-case basis versus that being kind of a default championship fight, because not all of them really need that.
Let me get to this comment real quick. All right, Chicken Talk says, if we have open scoring, fighters should know only combat sports participants know who's winning and losing.
That's an interesting perspective. I don't disagree, because you're right, the scoreboard and pretty much everything except combat sports. And shouldn't you know where you are? Shouldn't you know where you are? I don't disagree with that sentiment at all. I think it would get a lot of pushback from the general public, because there's people that appears that are going to say, well, they've not done it before, so should they start? So I think that's the pushback that you're going to see first is, why should that start?
Right.
I don't know, Q. What do you think?
I mean, I think open scoring is something that's been considered and toyed around with a little bit. I can see the argument on both sides of it when you're talking about not doing it as well as doing it, because there is a valid point when you talk about in sports. You kind of always know where you stand. You kind of always know what you need to do in order to win the match. And it's not left up to the very end to know whether or not you knew that you won the match or not. But that does, kind of create some anticipation towards, the ending of the fight, when you talk about judging in combat sports, because, there's not really any other sport where the judge, doesn't tell you what you got right away. You know what I mean? Like, it's like a draw out thing. It's not round by round. Even when you talk about like Olympic sports, like gymnastics or whatever, you get judged, per dive, or you get judged, per vault. You know what your scores are every time in every round, but you don't know that in boxing for every round. So I don't know, man. It's not an easy solution, and we all know that, because if it was an easy solution, they would have done it already.
Right.
But
I wonder if they're even having combos. That's my thing. Yeah, that's my thing. I wonder if they're constantly looking at that, like, how the NFL has a competition committee. I believe the NBA has something that functions that way as well. Just to always try and improve the game. Number one, for the viewing public, the people that support the sport, but then also just for the participants as well, to make the game better. They don't always make the right decision. I don't know if it's easier or harder to make major changes in boxing versus like football, because like football, they can actually put a rule in within the week. They could call
Right.
it
They
no
have a commission.
hitting.
They're sectionized by, and they're all in the same policies. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I know when you have four sanctioning bodies, they all even have their own rules for like rehydration, you know,
Right.
and how their mandatories are played out, and how, you know, who has an interim belt, who doesn't. So it would be much harder in boxing, but I think the way you fix that is you fix it at the state level, get the athletic commissions to adopt the rules, and then if they all uniformly work, you don't have to worry about what the commissions are going to do or what the sanctioning bodies are going to do, because the state athletic commissions are going to dictate more rules than anything. So I think that that's one place to look at it. I just know that if you make a rule that certain sanctioning bodies or promoters don't like, they just won't fight in your state. So I know that it would need to be like a mass thing, like all the athletic commissions will have to get on the same page with certain stuff for combat sports for some of these changes to really affect those sanctioning bodies. Now, we kind of veered off. We were talking about Ellis with the scoring. Again, I disagree with the final score, but they both agreed to a rematch, so that's cool. Let's get into Jaron Ennis. So maybe you have had some conversations about what people have been saying about his performance already, and honestly, bro, it didn't really expose a lot to me about Boots. Besides him not really being a lateral fighter, but he's
Yeah.
never had to really show that. That's the only thing
Right.
that really like I didn't even think about it until I saw that he wasn't. He was like planted. He's sitting down on every shot, and this conversation has been had a couple times. Don't change the speed on his shots, and that's because he's planted and he's sitting down on every punch. He's throwing his whole body into every shot, so you can time that. So when you face elite, truly elite fighters, Keith Thurman, Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford, them dudes are good at catching timing. And once they get your timing, they gonna attack, and you might not have nothing for their offense when they get on. And they all have their own thing that they do really well. That being said, yeah, we did see the press conference. I'm getting to that too. But that was the only thing that was new to me. When he tried to get inside exchange with I'm gonna call him Karan because I just don't want to keep trying to say his name over and over the right way. But I think he came in with a really good game plan to keep Boots off him. It just wasn't a winning game plan. That being said, the lateral movement, he must have seen something in Boots that let him know he could get away with that for 12 rounds and go and get that check and get up out of there. He moved around, he got shots in when he felt like it. And when they fought on the inside, Boots had a little trouble in them exchanges. You can't have them kind of problems against Terrence Crawford because he gonna hit you between shots while you loading up. He gonna hit you with 2 or 3 and use his footwork and get the hell out of the way. Let me get some chicken comments. I don't want to go too far past anything. Appreciate you checking in with us, bro, for sure. Let's see. All right. So I'm gonna get to. So first he asked about the press conference. Definitely saw. I'm gonna get to that. And then the other comment is
Excuses. No accountability. I like Boots, but Bozy ain't it.
ooh, okay. Now let me get this fight analysis out real quick. And then we can get to that. And I'm pretty sure you saw some of the press conference. So we talk about that more than the fight necessarily because there wasn't a lot to see. We saw Boots struggle in areas that hadn't been presented to him before. So he's definitely gonna have some areas to work on. And that goes into my post fight. So in the press conference, they both were saying he didn't want to engage and he tried to run and this and that. And honestly, if you watch film, this is what's crazy. They were both saying we don't watch film. We watch the opponent for the first round or two, and then we come up with a strategy. You could tell that there was no strategy for a mobile opponent. What do you think about? Let's start here in the general context. Buddy McGirt said something similar recently. What do you think about that say don't watch film?
I mean, not watching film is ignorant, in my opinion. I mean, if you're going to take time out of your day to train, to lift weights, to condition, to pay for a dietitian, to work on certain things that make your game better, not looking at the opponent that you're going to face next and finding out a strategy that works for you to beat that skill set that guy offers or that woman offers if it's a female fighter, is just it's ignorant in my opinion. I don't see any benefit in not watching film. Now maybe if you want to say, hey, we're not going to watch all of his fights, or we're not going to watch anything from more than 2 or 3 years ago, then I could maybe see that. But to not watch anything that of the guy, or to watch very little of the guy you're going to face, I think says a lot about you or the opponent, or what you think of the opponent, because you can really only get away with that as a prospect. That's realistically the only time that you can get away with that, because, when you're a prospect and you're coming up, maybe, you can't find film on the guy. Maybe the guy that they got you match made against, there's not a lot of film out there for you to find. So you kind of got to just take it, once you get in the fight, you make a couple adjustments. You're clearly a level or two above this guy. So you just got to figure him out for a couple of rounds, and then, and then you can go to work. But when you get to a contender level, where film is available, there's no benefit to not using it. So I really don't see the point of not using it to its full extent, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I don't, I'm a coach, so I'm big on film. I think everything is in film. Everything is in studying your opponent. And like you said, you have to set a nice, reasonable barometer. As of recently, because we did have a COVID year, you might be able to go back, let's say 4 years, and the guy's still kind of the same fighter, right? But in general, you would say over the last couple of years, especially at the prospect crossover contender level, they're probably fighting 2 to 3 times a year. If you just watch 2 years of film, that's about 4 to 6 fights that are going to tell you what you're getting in that opponent. That being said, I do believe that you have to at least look at some of the last couple fights. At least the last couple fights. And let me see, as you switching over devices.
Yeah.
All right, but yeah, you at least have to look at the